Hello Spoonfolk, and welcome to video 3 in the disability series. Today we're going to be talking about long-term coping strategies, so things you can do to deal with a permanent problem. This is going to be about gradual changes that you make in your life, probably not all of them at once, and the idea is to make it so that you're less likely to injure yourself in the first place, basically, and to basically just set up a kind of system so that your body is catered to in general as a disabled body. Again, this is just what works for me specifically. It may not map perfectly onto everyone, and you need to decide for yourself whether or not you want to take anything from this video or try anything from it. So with no further ado, let's get started. Habits and lifestyle. So the first thing you want to do is drop any pain worsening activities. If something hurts, stop it. In my case, this meant fine motor activities like writing, drawing, playing musical instruments, cooking. I get that giving up these things can be painful in a different way, but it is better to adapt or shift in the early stages of this condition rather than continue on wrecking your body with a skill that you're going to have to give up anyway. And I do mean shift rather than always stop entirely. There are workarounds that you can do. So for example, for me, giving up playing physical instruments meant switching to electronic music because computers are fairly easier for me to use, but it's a steep learning curve, and I do wish that I'd done it a lot earlier so that I'd be better than I am at this point in time. When I want to do something that's more like painting, then I tend to muck around with makeup, for example, because I find that a lot of the movements when you're painting your face are a lot looser than when you're painting on paper, and also skin is just has more give and it's squishier and it hurts your hand less than drawing on a hard surface, I find. There are so often ways to just sort of switch into a different thing, arguably, electronic music is not the same as guitar and makeup is not the same as painting, but something that's similar enough that you can get the same kind of satisfaction from it without injuring yourself so much. While you're doing an activity, if you tend towards hyperfocus, you may have the problem of keeping your body very still, potentially in a very bad position, for hours and hours and hours at a time, and then not noticing until it's way too late. So something that I'm not good at, but is a good idea, is to use a kind of Pomodoro style technique for when you're doing a focused activity. The point here being less to get you to work and more to get you to stop. So when the timer goes off, it's a reminder to stop, take a minute to just stretch, breathe, check in with your body, make sure you're not bent in some weird pretzel position or all horribly tensed up for no reason. Just sort all of that out before you go back to whatever you're doing. Obviously, not everything can be stopped or switched, so in those cases, just reduce that thing as much as possible and then make sure you have additional support for when you are doing it. So that could be things like gloves or splints, or it could be an internal thing, for example, I have my plate stance for when I have to pick up a plate, making sure my core is really activated and everything, so I'll come back to that in a bit more detail later. Adaptions like using dictation software instead of typing, things like that. So give up your hobbies, don't do more than you can manage, and reduce your number of friends. No, you don't actually have to do that, but you do have to think about socializing a bit more carefully, because going out can be very draining, talking to people can be draining, so you have to plan carefully and give yourself days either side of an event to recover if you need that. I'm going to talk about navigating socializing and relationships more in another video. When you are going out, make sure to carry your phone and things that you have to take with you kind of on your body rather than in a backpack or a shoulder bag. So I find pockets or kind of a bag round the hips is better because it saves the neck and shoulders from getting tense and sore. These changes should apply to your hobbies, obviously, but also your job if possible. I get that is not possible for a lot of people. I find a lot of disabled people that I know tend towards freelance style work, and obviously like self-employed is the ideal if you can manage it. Obviously also like get on benefits if you can, but that's again probably like subject for a whole other video. You might want to alter your workspace, so here's a demo of mine. So this is my room. This is where I live. So if you can see here, there's this seat, which I'm not going to show you because my friend cut my hair on it and it's still covered with little hair bits, and I don't think you'll enjoy that very much. So I'm not gonna show you that, but the idea is it's basically just one of those seats that has little pads for your knees, and this one is also a rocky seat, so the idea is it kind of like forces you to sit in a more upright position. So I have one of those, and then you can see my sort of setup here. So what I do is I have it set up like this so that the screen is at eye level but the keyboard is not, so you're not like scrunched up trying to type there or craning your neck trying to type below, if you see what I mean, because I use this standing desk. And what that also means is if I want to, I can get this mouse and put it up there and then type standing up, so I can switch position from between like sitting and standing. The standing desk also, I put it on my bed if I want to. They say that you shouldn't work on your bed. I work on my bed. Gotta do what you gotta do. Generally throughout the day, if you can, try to sort of change positions and move around a little bit, especially if you don't get much exercise otherwise anyway. Finally, sleep hygiene. If you have sleep problems, then you gotta reduce your caffeine and reduce your alcohol and no blue light an hour before sleeping, blah blah blah. Like, you probably know all of this already, technically, but like, it doesn't work unless you do it. I find that drugs like alcohol can worsen pain as well, which is not really surprising. I mean, it's an inflammatory, isn't it? These days I barely drink, to be honest. Like, I'm not quite teetotal, I will on occasion, but it's quite rare, and I find that I'm generally just healthier when I don't. Some people can obviously get away with putting more nonsense into their body or like putting it through stuff that it's not going to really like, but if you're chronically unwell, it obviously makes a lot more difference to put in the effort to at least give yourself a baseline of good conditions for like sleep and general health, because your body is more likely to mess with it anyway. If you're disabled, you do have to treat your body like a temple. An old, crumbly temple that will immediately fall apart if you don't constantly maintain it. Exercise! I do stretches. There are some stretches that I do every morning and every evening that are very basic and take me like a couple of minutes to do, so I that's something that I ensure I do every day. It just works out all the stiffness, so I'm able to go about my day. I notice a really big difference if I don't do them, and because it's such a short amount of time, I find that it's really not an issue. It becomes as part of the routine as like brushing my teeth. And there are also like hand specific ones or ones for specific areas. So like for me, for example, I do like this stretch for my forearm, and then this one as well. I guess that's kind of a very similar stretch, but it seems like it's getting this bit, I think. Physio exercises. I forgot a prop. Sexy latex. This one's not actually latex. It feels like skin. For physio stuff, you want to make sure that you're healed enough that something isn't going to cause excruciating pain. I wouldn't have done these exercises that I'm about to demo when I was in so much pain that I couldn't like put clothes on over my head without being in agony. Like for physio stuff, things like you can focus on strengthening the specific muscles that are around the weak area to like provide more support. So like I do a bunch of exercises like this one and this one and like this one. I'll link to the actual video of this specific one, but you know, just this kind of applies to physio exercises in general. Your exercises shouldn't cause the kind of pain that means your condition is being triggered. You might get a kind of muscle burn, but that feels very different. And I think anyone who has a condition like this probably knows the difference. Other things that can be really good for slightly delicate bodies are things like yoga, walking for just general exercise if you can walk, and swimming. Obviously, exercise in general gives you general exercise benefits, but specifically resistance-based exercises, so like anything with a resistance band, swimming, or push-ups, or anything that's like that, it specifically serves to strengthen the muscles around the injured ligaments and the dodgy joints, and encourages bone cells to develop, apparently. The key thing with staying consistent with exercise, because it can be really difficult to keep up, is, I find, to tell yourself that any amount is enough. That helps to stop you falling off completely. So, for example, if I normally do, like, say, half an hour of yoga a day, that's just an example, and then one day I don't feel up to it, if I do 5 minutes, that's enough. If I do like 1 minute, that's enough. And often I find that telling myself that makes me motivated to do it, because I'm like, okay, well, I only have to do it for 2 minutes. And then if I can only do it for a short amount of time, then I stop. But often once I've started, I find that I'm able to do a little bit more anyway. But don't push it. Like, don't push it beyond what your body tells you is good for you. Vitamins and minerals. So, nutrition is a thing. It sounds obvious, but because, again, food is one of those things that you just don't necessarily think about that much, and you don't think it can influence your health in that drastic of a way. For some reason, I guess because, again, it's just a sort of an everyday thing. But it does, and it's really important to think about, even if it's often kind of the last thing we think of. So you should think about your diet and consider whether you're getting everything you need, especially if you're following a diet like veganism or whatever. Don't shout at me, this is important. My problems started developing like way before I went vegan, so I know it's not like caused by that per se, but restricting your diet in any way at all can result in being deficient in one thing or another if you're not careful, in much the same way as just eating a load of like stuff that isn't so good for you can result in having too much of a thing that's not very good, and then that's not very good for you. It's important either way to look into what you might be lacking or what you might have too much of, and to make sure that all your bases are covered, and to remember that not all conditions or all budgets allow for all diets. Do your own research about this. I mean, do your own research about, like, anything I say, but especially about this. Talk about it with a professional, because I am very much not an expert. I'm just kind of telling you the process that I went through and I'm currently going through, and just raising it as kind of a thing you might want to look into. I had a commenter in my first video about disability telling me that I should try the carnist diet, which I can only assume was a right-wing infiltrator who wants me to end up like Jordan Peterson. That having said, I do intend to at some point like talk to a dietitian, and I would consider going non-vegan if I absolutely had to. I would really rather not, because I've been vegan for a long time and I don't have like secret cravings for anything. I just don't want that shit. But if I tried everything else and there were some non-vegan options left untried that could potentially help, then I'd be open to trying that. In my opinion, the consumption of animal products, where necessary for one's health, or where sticking to that diet would in some way damage your health significantly, then I think that's ethical and justifiable. I've talked about all of that stuff in more detail in another video. If you're interested in that, I won't go into it too much more now because I'm kind of going on a tangent, but I'll tell you what I do at the moment. You want to get your vitamin levels checked with a blood test. Prior to taking any supplements at all of my levels came up completely fine, apart from vitamin D. But I don't think it hurts to make sure that you're getting like a certain baseline of vitamin and mineral intake when you're also chronically unwell. So now I take a kind of generic vegan multivitamin in case I get less of one or the other now and then, in addition to like a high strength supplement for vitamin D and algal oil, which is like functionally the same as fish oil. It's where the fish get the oil from. Now, vitamin D, you get it primarily from the sun. It's quite well known that people with more melanin are more likely to be at risk of not getting enough vitamin D. But to be honest, if you also live on this miserable slice of rock and the sun is your only source of vitamin D, then your levels are likely to be just within acceptable at best. It doesn't take much of sitting inside the house all day, even for a white person, to fall into the danger zone. It's really important to ensure that you're getting enough of it because it's really important for bones and teeth. Also, a deficiency can cause things like chronic fatigue and depression. So if you have problems anyway, you really want to make sure this isn't a contributing factor. I had a severe deficiency and was prescribed a mega supplement that would probably be like possibly too much for most of the paler folk even in this country, but for me it just keeps me at a safe level because I would immediately just kind of plummet anytime that I came off it. Also, another extremely obvious thing, but one that's often neglected, drink water. Drink enough water, but also make sure that you're eating fiber with it so that your body actually like hydrates and the water doesn't just kind of pass through your body, taking out any like useful electrolytes and stuff with it. Okay, so for some chronically unwell people, heat is really bad and they need to stay cool at all costs and stay away from heat. If that's the case for you, ignore this section. For me, cold is probably like the single most aggravating factor for my condition. So combat it with general warmth. Use heaters if the central heating isn't enough, which for me it often isn't. I found that like radiation type heaters, like the kind you would use to warm a lizard, seem to have a better effect. They seem to like get right into the source of the problem rather than just kind of heating the air around it like a regular radiator. But those are expensive and they can be quite intense. I may have accidentally set my foot on fire with one. I'm not sure it was one that was supposed to be used indoors. It was worth it though. If you don't fancy singeing your flesh, then it might be a good idea to have a look into those radiation heat lamp things, you know, the ones that look like HAL. I've never used one myself, but I think it might be a better and safer option than just kind of co-opting whatever's in the immediate vicinity. Have baths. Baths are really good. Have baths. When you do have to go into a cold environment, you want to be extremely prepared. Like, I made a terrible mistake a couple of days ago. I was going to see a friend's show, and the weather had been really nice up till now, so like I'm not used to sort of wearing a jacket and stuff anymore. It was at night and we just kind of left and I was wearing layers, but I hadn't taken a scarf critically, and like my neck is the first thing that will really flare up. So we went and then we wandered around for a while and then we realized that the venue was outdoors, which like is another thing you need to check for things like this. So I couldn't go to the show. I had to just come home and I was in horrible pain and I had to take the whole next day off to recover. Just be like doubly prepared for stuff, so check places in advance, make sure that like you're catered to or it's going to be warm enough, make sure that you're taking extra layers with you just in case you need them, because the consequences of bad weather suddenly setting in for you are going to be a lot worse than for someone else. Like for someone else, if it rains, they're just going to be uncomfortable for a bit. If it rains for you, it might mean that you're going to be in pain for several days. It's not something you should have to do, but unfortunately, it is something you do have to do. It's a learning process. So don't beat yourself up too much if you get it wrong, but also make sure that you do learn from when it does go wrong and try and prepare a bit better next time. We just can't take the same risks that other people can. Like, what isn't a risk for a regular person is a risk for someone with a disability of some kind. So, yeah. Don't make the same mistakes I do. Along with the Pomodoro sort of like stop and check in with your body thing that I mentioned earlier, it's a good idea to also include like checking whether the temperature is warm enough during your 5-minute like stop break. If you're very focused on something and the room around you gradually gets too cold, you're very unlikely to notice. Or I say you, I mean I don't notice. Then it's the same thing, then the damage is already done and then you're hurt and you have to blah 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 blah. So just having a system of checks in place really helps to avoid that kind of situation. Not technically a heat thing, and I won't go into this in too much detail here, but I found that a lot of like mindfulness and meditation type stuff helps me to be more generally aware of my body and what is happening to it. Not being super aware of your body is likely to be a problem if you're prone to sort of dissociation and your brain is just sort of generally somewhere else. And like it would be, wouldn't it, if your body is like a mess. And that's basically it. I've tried to keep this video reasonably concise. A lot of the things I only just kind of touched on, and I am planning on covering a lot more stuff in more detail, in particular like this more psychological side of things, for example, and coping mechanisms that are more to do with how you approach situations rather than sort of what practically to do. Loads of things. Basically, I have so much to say about disability. There's more videos coming, although I think I'm going to do something else after this just to break it up a bit. But yeah, let me know, like, within the sphere of disability, if there's anything that either I've touched on or haven't touched on that you would like to see me cover in more detail. Special thanks to my Ko-fi supporters, whose names are coming up on screen. If you would like to help me a lot, you can become a monthly Ko-fi supporter yourself by going over to my Ko-fi and doing the subscribing thing. If you can't do that or don't want to, then you can also help me a significant amount by liking this video, commenting on it, sharing it, and subscribing to my channel. I hope this was useful, and I will see you next time.